a proper thing to be doing.
Just finally, if we go, what is it about the Titanic, do you think, that people get so entranced by, perhaps, or fascinated by, even nowadays?
Oh, well, I think it all goes back to that story of hubris and the doomed venture, the sort of wealth and glamour of some of the people, the desperate poverty of others fleeing to America. Of course, the film, I still remember seeing that as a teenager, and left a big impact on me. I was more interested in the engine room scenes than the love scenes, but it's made with some wonderful ship.
Good to have you on.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Of course you can, yes.
Bevan, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of businesses like casinos and radio stations that would sail to international waters to do things that were illegal in New Zealand and then come back during the day. How come we don't have ventures like that anymore?
Oh, I suspect the world's just opened up a few opportunities for those online, and the pirate radio is still an international crime to run a pirate radio station. But I think the tech people surpass the maritime people in that case.
Nice to have you on. Yeah, very interesting. Bevan Martin there, maritime law expert. There is something about that story, isn't it, Jenna? But it's so endlessly complex about ownership rights and whether or not it's right for a Marconi wireless telegraph to be displayed in Las Vegas, where maybe it should be sitting still under the ocean. But then again, we want to see it.
Yeah, but we've got photos and photographs, haven't we? We've got shots. We've got moving pictures of it. I'm with the NOAAB here, I think they are. I think that it should be left as a graveyard at the bottom of the sea, because you've got one party who can make a financial gain out of this, who can rape and pillage everything down there. Somehow, to me, it just doesn't seem right to the memory of the people who lost their lives on that ship.
Is it perhaps raising up those treasures for younger generations to see and be entranced by, Guy?
I wish they were doing it for some sort of noble reason like that. But the fact they're doing it for an exhibit in Las Vegas is just kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's tragic. It's not going to the Natural Museum in London.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be part of the, Caesar's Palace or something, They'll be making money out of it.
Do you think so? Yeah, it's certainly quite a story, isn't it? And a few Titanic fans coming on online for us. Titanic was a British ship. The US has no jurisdiction. Also, it is a grave. And those wanting to grab stuff are slimy grave robbers, says this person here. But nonetheless, it was a fascinating tale, wasn't it, Guy? And a very good movie.
I'm still waiting for the movie to be made of the Rena in Tauranga. Let's get that movie made.
Do you want to expand on that?
Great movie. That would be a great movie.
I'm not sure, but maybe it will. We move on to the story.
Maybe you could
uniquely Kiwi.
Yes, indeed. Maybe you could have a part, Guy, in that movie.
I'll be the love interest, that's for sure.
Exactly. Guy Williams, Janet Wilson, thank you very much for joining us on the panel. See you tomorrow, Friday, from 3:45. Checkpoint next. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, forget high noon at OK Corral. This is a caucus showdown. The National Leadership Challenger, Todd Muller and Simon Bridges, are both in Wellington, circling the wagons. Stand by for the latest poll numbers. An urgent call to assemble an A-team to catch our economy up to Australia's post-COVID-19. A damning report into the Civil Aviation Authority reveals a toxic culture of bullying and harassment. Thousands of cruise ship workers are still stranded on ships around the globe post-COVID, and bar owners raise a glass to reopening after 8 long weeks. But no PDA and stay off the dance floor. And school sport could kick off again next month.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. With less than 24 hours to go, National MP Todd Muller is on a sprint to pitch his case to all his colleagues ahead of a vote on the party's leadership. The Bay of Plenty MP and relative unknown will face off with Simon Bridges tomorrow at a midday caucus showdown at Parliament. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
National MPs continue to fly into Wellington from around the country, but for the most part are staying tight-lipped on how they will vote. Those close to both camps are all agreed it's still too close to call, and while both sides say they have strong numbers, neither are prepared to say they have a majority. All eyes are on a One News Colmar Brunton poll due tonight. It's understood Auckland Central MP and former Education Minister Nikki Kaye is running on a ticket with Mr Muller. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
Nurses who conduct much of the country's COVID-19 testing say they feel undervalued and let down because they can't get the pay rise they're seeking. Primary care nurses who work in GPs and medical centres have been seeking a 10% pay rise to catch up with District Health Board nurses. But their union, the Nurses Organisation, says they have only been offered 4.5% spread over 2 years. Union Industrial Advisor Chris Wilson says many of them have been working long days swabbing for the virus at community testing centres.
Praise has been heaped on them for taking that element of risk and contributing to that stemming, yet the value of that work is not being followed through.
Chris Wilson of the Nurses Organisation. The Director-General of Health is anticipating he'll recommend to the government that it consider loosening Level 2 restrictions or even a move to Level 1. New Zealand has recorded its 4th consecutive day with no new cases of COVID-19. 97% of all cases have recovered. Ashley Bloomfield says officials are in a good position to provide decision-making advice to the Cabinet on Monday. He says they're increasingly confident there are no hidden pockets of coronavirus in the community. Dr Bloomfield says widespread community testing is still crucial. Bars and nightclubs can reopen today, but many will remain shut due to further COVID-19 regulations. Numbers are restricted to 100 and they have to ensure customers are served, separated and seated. The Chief Executive of Hospitality New Zealand, Julie White, says the ban on dancing and the capped capacity means many nightclubs will remain closed for now.
If you look at the traditional style of the nightclubs, they usually can take around 200. This will pretty much mean, under these new guidelines, they can only fit 40. So that's why it's just not going to be viable for them to open.
Julie White is encouraging everybody to go out and show support for their favourite bar to help ensure they survive. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford says despite a damning report into bullying and harassment at the country's aviation watchdog, he has no concerns about safety in the industry. The review found complaints about bullying and harassment, including sexual harassment, at the Civil Aviation Authority were poorly handled. Mr Twyford, who ordered the review in September, says it was necessary to get the problems out in the open.
I found it disappointing, actually, to read the extent to which a failure of consistent and effective leadership at the Civil Aviation Authority has meant that the agency for a number of years hasn't been providing what I would describe as a kind of positive and healthy workplace environment.
Phil Twyford says, however, New Zealanders can have complete confidence in the CAA. Local councils are facing an increasing number of unpaid rates. Councils are reporting rising numbers of rates defaults due to the COVID crisis. The President of Local Government New Zealand, Dave Cull, says councils are aware that many ratepayers are hurting and want to help.
They can look at rates deferrals, which puts it off, or rates remission, which essentially means that the council forgoes some of the rates payment. Now, councils will be looking at all of those options, but they probably cannot afford to waive actual rates.
Dave Cull. The Auckland Council this afternoon backed a rates postponement scheme for residents and businesses hurt by COVID-19. And it's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. In sport, elite netballers have taken a cautious approach to the return to team training this week, with ANZ Premiership teams waiting longer than their Super Rugby counterparts to get back to training venues. The Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic were back on court today with fitness testing. Defender Irina Mikaere says it wasn't always easy to keep up the training during lockdown.
You wanted to train at the start and then it became a bit mundane towards the middle, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to motivate myself to get up, because it was easy to just lay in bed and have a nice, day, but I was able to train every day.
Irina Mikaere. The New Zealand Warriors will face 2 fixtures against the Newcastle Knights, the Cronulla Sharks and the Penrith Panthers in the rejigged NRL season. The draw for the remainder of the 20-round rugby league competition was announced today, with matches to be played from Thursday to Sunday each week, starting from May 28th. The Warriors have been given a number of Friday night games. The matches will kick off at 8 o'clock New Zealand time, which suits Warriors player Chanel Harris-Davita.
I had a quick look at the draw, and I didn't think anything changes for our team. We played quite a few Friday night games last year at Mount Smart, and we put on a few good performances, so hopefully we can carry that on throughout this season.
Chanel Harris-Davita. That's the news.
Politics.
I think Simon Bridges' move yesterday was probably one of the most extraordinary acts of political hari-kari that we've seen since Andrew Little.
Booze.
No dancing, no groping, no snogging.
What's the point of going out then?
And brothels.
For some sex workers, there's going to be a hard choice between seeing a client and maybe not being able to get proper contact tracing information versus turning down that client and that probably much needed funds.
And the Ruddy Turn Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island, generally fine weather. The odd shower about eastern Northland and Coromandel and northern Gisborne. Cloudy periods about Kapiti and Wellington with patchy drizzle early tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Bulla and Westland, often cloudy with a few showers. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today. Rain developing in Southland, Clutha and the Southern Lakes this evening. Then spreading north tomorrow, but only the odd shower reaching Dunedin and North Otago. Fiordland, rain with heavy falls easing tomorrow night. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. You're with RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. National MPs have been subject to a mad dash stumping campaign today as Simon Bridges and Todd Muller each made a desperate pitch for the party's leadership. The two are in a bitter showdown accelerated by a devastating News Hub Reid Research poll on Monday. Mr Muller sent out an email yesterday signalling an intent to challenge after Mr Bridges threw down the gauntlet, promising to put his position to the test. A One News Colmar Brunton poll is out tonight and all eyes will be on the result and how it might impact tomorrow's face-off. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Enter the quiet contender, Todd Muller, arriving in the capital this morning, ready to commence a coup. But first, a full day of campaigning, one-on-one to his caucus colleagues.
I'm very much focused at the moment on conversations with them individually, and that's what I'll continue to do through to tomorrow.
And that's what he's been doing. MPs on both sides have confirmed they've received phone calls today. Muller pitching and promising right to the last minute.
Look, all conversations around leadership should stay within caucus, and we'll see the outcome of our caucus deliberations tomorrow.
It's the same message being pushed by his presumed running mate, Nikki Kay, also touching down in Wellington.
I think it's really important in terms of the respect of my caucus colleagues that we let these issues happen in the caucus room.
The two were caught off guard yesterday, left scrambling by Simon Bridges' morning show gambit, where he demanded his challengers put up or shut up.
I have no plan B. I intend with Paula to win. I'm very confident of that.
Look, I'm feeling really confident.
Paula Bennett is Bridges' number 2, a picture of positivity on TVNZ's breakfast show this morning. But quietly, both sides are saying it's a close run race. Camp Muller says their numbers are strong, but won't go any further. Camp Bridges says it's too close to call. One supporter told us, "I wouldn't even bet on it." Another said they were confident for the moment, and that for the moment is critical. In less than an hour, a new poll will drop, and all MPs will be watching to see how bad the damage is. It was a poll on Monday that set this all in motion. It could be a poll that ends it, one way or the other.
We've got an interesting kind of 36 hours ahead of us, and I wish we weren't doing it because I think there's more important things we should be doing. But here we are. We'll get through that by Friday afternoon. We'll be back on track, hitting it out there, and I know we'll be doing it as a team.
The team has a critical decision ahead of it. On the one side, Simon Bridges, a proven fighter and hard worker who's brought the party back from the brink before. But he's also deeply disliked by the public, wallowing in the polls and struggling to strike the right tone in his opposition. Todd Muller carries none of that baggage. He's respected across the aisle and in rural circles. But he's unknown and he's untested. He could crumble. The MP has been on a mission to boost his profile in recent months, running dozens of public meetings around the country on climate change and agriculture.
I am the MP for Bay of Plenty. I've had that role now for 5.5 years.
And his efforts showed up in the MP expenses released today, an almost $35,000 bill for travel and accommodation over the first 3 months, more than any other national MP, bar Mr Bridges, and just $2,000 behind him. The tour stop may have helped him win over some national members, but it's the caucus vote that matters, and most are staying tight-lipped.
Not at all, no. I've got nothing more to say till tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
You'll just have to wait till tomorrow.
Tomorrow will bring certainty as to the party's leader, but will also bring a whole new challenge. Either victor will be left in charge of a bitterly divided caucus. Some MPs will be relegated to the back benches, some staff may go. Tomorrow is a critical test, but it's only the first one in a long run-up to the election. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
And we'll have more on the battle for the National Party leadership after 6. The Director-General of Health is anticipating he'll recommend the government consider loosening Level 2 restrictions or even a move to Level 1. New Zealand has recorded its 4th consecutive day with no new cases of COVID-19. At today's briefing, Dr Ashley Bloomfield said the response to the global pandemic is looking very promising.
I'm feeling encouraged, as we all should, by that. And I think that then means we're in a good position to provide advice to Cabinet to make a decision next Monday about the possibility of increasing the numbers in groups. And of course, the key thing here is that because, as again, we've had quite high numbers of tests being done of both symptomatic and asymptomatic people, where we just increasingly are confident that there aren't these hidden pockets out there. And that really then does allow us to start thinking seriously about what would a move to Alert Level 1 look like.
At this stage, 97% of all cases have recovered. There are only 7 regions with active cases now, a combined total of 30 active cases, while 9 of the country's 20 DHBs have reported no new cases for more than 28 days. Dr Bloomfield says the strict lockdown is paying dividends.
We are increasingly confident that we have successfully broken that chain of transmission here on shore. And I guess 2 things from that. One is that's as good an outcome as we might have hoped for from the lockdown in Alert Level 4. And again, we were able to do that for as short a period as possible and open up. It means we can open up more rapidly. I think the second point is that then means we've got an even stronger focus on ensuring our border is very robust in our measures there, but also a focus on how we might put in place the systems and processes that would allow us to start to open that cautiously with Australia and then potentially beyond.
Dr Ashley Bloomfield, the country's total number of confirmed and probable cases stands at 1,503. A damning ministerial review into the Civil Aviation Authority released today reveals a toxic culture of bullying and harassment. The agency, which is tasked with the job of keeping New Zealanders safe in the air, says it's taking the findings on board. Ruth Hill reports.
An old boys club is how one former CAA inspector has described the culture to RNZ. The review has found complaints about bullying and harassment, including sexual harassment, were badly handled, with complainants accused of pursuing personal agendas at the expense of the CAA's reputation. The reviewers carried out over 120 confidential interviews with past and present staff members, managers, board members and stakeholders. They say they did not find a deliberate and tolerated culture of bullying and harassment at the CAA, but they found that bad behaviour was able to occur because of leadership failures to identify and address issues like bullying and sexual harassment. Transport Minister Phil Twyford, who asked for the resignation of the previous chair, Nigel Gould, last August, ordered the review the following month. He says he found it disappointing to read the extent to which a failure of consistent and effective leadership created a poor working environment.
That's not good enough in the modern world. Public service organisations, in fact any organisations, really need to provide positive, safe, healthy environment for their staff.
Mr Twyford says, however, he has confidence in the new leadership at CAA, which has accepted all findings. And he says despite the CAA's problems, he doesn't have any concerns about safety in the aviation industry itself.
New Zealanders can have great confidence in our aviation safety regulatory system, and aviation is very, very safe in New Zealand. But this review is quite a different thing. It's about internal organisational culture and how people are treated at work.
The review also mentions the high level of cynicism and distrust among staff towards senior management, the personality politics, and the acrimonious relationship between the CAA and the Aviation Security Service, AVSEC. The Public Service Association represents workers at both agencies. Its National Secretary, Glenn Barclay, says progress has only been made thanks to the bravery and determination of whistleblowers who chose to stick their necks out.
Look, it's about a culture of fear, people feeling worried about speaking up, concerns that people were being having negative views expressed of them, and that there were pockets of staff who didn't know how to treat women with dignity and respect. So there's quite a wide range of negative behaviours.
Mr Barclay says changing the culture won't be a quick fix. CAA Chair Janice Frederick has apologised to all CAA staff.
There will be zero tolerance of poor behaviour. The acting chief executive is in no doubt about that, and she in turn has made that very clear to the staff, so there will be nobody there that will be in any doubt as to the expectations.
Ms Frederick says no one has lost their job as a result of the review, which was not intended to blame any individuals. She concedes, however, that the uncertainty generated by the time it has taken to complete the review and a lengthy restructuring process at the same time may have resulted in good people leaving.
But there are skilled and capable people on the CAA staff at the moment, and they are passionate and committed to aviation safety in New Zealand, and the reviewers were at pains to point that out.
Janice Frederick says the board fully accepts the review findings and will work with management, staff and the unions to implement all the recommendations. A separate inquiry led by independent QCs into bullying and harassment at AVSEC specifically is expected to be concluded next month. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen to hear from you on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, whether you want to get in touch about the National Party leadership spill or how would you like to see conditions loosened under level 2. Would you like to be able to go to church, concerts? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister's comments encouraging employers to explore a 4-day working week are being met with a flurry of mixed reactions from the business and tourism sectors. Jacinda Ardern floated the idea during a visit to Rotorua this week as a way of encouraging people to holiday more and kickstart domestic travel. While some say it's out of the question, others say now is the time for considering ideas outside the box. Rachel Thomas reports.
The Prime Minister has said the upcoming Queen's birthday weekend will be a shining light for tourism operators, with New Zealanders itching to travel after lockdown. And she'd like to see more domestic travel this week, encouraging businesses to look at a 4-day working week. The concept typically involves staff working 40 hours across 4 days, leaving them 3-day weekends. Chris Roberts, the Chief Executive of tourism industry Aotearoa, says this would help to feed operators while the international market remains closed.
I think any idea is worth considering at the moment. A 3-day weekend, we know, encourages people to travel and to move around the country, and so that would be good for tourism. It's obviously not going to work for every industry. Now, we wouldn't be expecting those people who are doing it tough to then be
considering using that time off for travel and spending money on a holiday.
But the idea has been quashed by Cooperative Business New Zealand, which represents the likes of Fonterra, Foodstuffs and Mitre 10. Its chief executive, Ros Henry, says its members support flexible working hours, but 4 days isn't feasible.
The majority of these organisations either supply or support the primary sector, and the cows and the sheep and the produce don't wait. You can't say we're going to work for 4 days and then we're going to have 3 days off. They need to be working when they need to be working.
Ros Henry says the co-op's members represent 16% of GDP, mostly in the primary industries. But an organisational psychologist says science tells us the idea can work well. Dr. Diane Gardner of Massey University says research from New Zealand and overseas supports having fewer days in a working week.
It gives more leisure time, it can increase satisfaction with the job, but it doesn't necessarily mean people are less productive at work. But it has to be carefully planned.
Dr. Diane Gardner says there are important caveats, like being clear about expectations and making sure the arrangement doesn't add to stress. The most well-known case of the 4-day working week in New Zealand was with Perpetual Guardian in 2018. Employees retained full salary while doing fewer hours overall, and its founder reported happier staff who had more time for hobbies. Dr. Gardner says this concept wouldn't work in all industries.
So if you've got people who are already flat out and you've tried to reduce working hours, then you're going to have people who are probably going to continue working from home or just going to continue working the same long hours.
A Queenstown tourism operator says unless employment law was looked at, such a move could inadvertently sting the industry more. Jeff McDonald, head of Skyline Queenstown, says hospitality providers, for example, are contract-bound to pay staff time and a half if they work extended hours.
The flip side for some businesses, particularly in the hospitality, is that you could end up paying, a lot more in wages for time and a half, those sorts of things. If work and employment laws were looked at to allow businesses to do that without having to incur these kind of time and a half costs and so forth, could be a really positive thing.
In the meantime, he's happy to see the bookings coming in thick and fast from those ready to get their feet off the ground and into a gondola. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
Bars are able to open from today without the need to pretend they're a restaurant and serve food to patrons. Forced to wait a week longer before they could open under Level 2, they still have to comply with the 3 S's, meaning customers need to be served, separated and seated. And they can't have more than 100 in the place at a time. Conan Young and visual journalist Nathan McKinnon called in on 2 of the first pubs to reopen in Christchurch.
The Bog Irish Bar in Christchurch opened on the dot of midday. 5 minutes later, regular William Bowman was sitting at a table ready to be served. Having waited 8 weeks for his first sip of Guinness from the tap, he was more than happy to wait a few minutes more for the head on his first pint to settle.
As good as you remember?
It's as good as I remember, yeah. Pretty decent.
Some of the locals have been getting together via Zoom and having a chat with each other while enjoying a Guinness from the comfort of their own homes. But William says there's no replacement for being there in the flesh.
Pretty good place to be and enjoy with the other customers and stuff here.
Yeah. And so I guess you can get Guinness in a can, can't you? But it probably doesn't...
Not the same. Not the same at all.
The Bog is putting on live music tonight, but due to the risk of a close contact on the dance floor, for now, dancing is banned.
Probably not me.
You weren't going to be up there anyway?
No.
Yeah.
I'm normally the one standing at the side watching.
Yeah. And people have to sort of stick to their tables. Do you think that'll make a difference?
Well, as long as you got a good group at the table, it should be fine. Good group to chat with and drink with.
Bar manager Kelly Murray says it's great to be back in business after such a long period with no customers. Extra staff have been rostered on to deliver table service. And despite the need for people to stick to their tables, she's sure their live band will ensure there's a great atmosphere.
We hope so, because the music should create a good atmosphere, and a few of the locals and all that are coming back down, so fingers crossed.
It'd be good to see some of those familiar faces.
Yeah, they're already booked in, so should see a heap of them tonight.
Now, how many you got booked in for tonight?
Offhand, I think there's about 40.
She says it's a leap into the great unknown in terms of how well people will play by the rules.
So it'll be interesting to see if people try to get up and they're not even allowed to chat to other people and can't even cuddle people. And yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it goes. So this will be our test weekend to see what it's going to be like.
Yeah. Especially after a few beers. Yeah.
People will be wanting to mingle. I'll have to keep on top of it.
The Fitz Bar tried opening at the start of Level 2 by getting its patrons to have a meal with their drinks. Owner Dean Baldwin says that only lasted a day.
A lot of people that come in here are people that want to play pool or darts, play the pokies, have a bet on the TAB, or just have a couple of pints with their mate. And so we just found it was too hard. People were reacting to the restrictions, getting unhappy punters, so we thought we'll close until those restrictions are released.
Dean Baldwin is claiming the wage subsidy for all 17 of his staff, but has still had to take on extra debt while there has been zero money coming in. He's glad to finally be open, but says bars should have been able to open at the same time as restaurants and cafes.
I would say that the government in the past half dozen weeks has done an awesome job with how they've run the whole lockdown, but I would say that the way they separated a cafe and a restaurant and a bar was unfair. There was no need for them to do that. I mean, I know there's coffee shops down here on Fitzgerald Ave that would have more people in their premise at lunchtime than the bar would.
The Chief Executive of Hospitality New Zealand, Julie White, says many nightclubs will remain closed in Level 2.
If you look at the traditional style of the nightclubs, like they usually can take around 200. This will pretty much mean, under these new guidelines, they can only fit 40. So that's why it's just not going to be viable for them to open.
On Monday, the government will announce whether gathering sizes can increase under Level 2, which could allow bars to host more than 100 people at a time. Julie White is encouraging everybody to go out and show their support for their favourite bar and help to ensure they survive. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
One of the most powerful storms to hit South Asia in decades has killed at least 15 people in India and Bangladesh. Almost 3 million people were evacuated from their homes ahead of the arrival of Cyclone Amphan, which has flattened homes and brought dangerous coastal surges. The BBC's Yogita Lamai reports.
The might of this storm has left a trail of destruction. Amphan has plundered its way through the Indian state of West Bengal. Neighbouring Bangladesh also in its path. Hunkered inside, even those used to seeing cyclones every year are stunned by the fury.
I've never seen something like this ever in my life. It went on continuously for 3 hours without any signs of slowing down. From inside my home, I could hear tin roofs flying around. I could hear trees getting uprooted.
On the shores, seawater surged in. Along with heavy rainfall, it's caused flooding in many areas. Over the past 2 days, relief workers have moved millions to safety. But this year, the coronavirus crisis is an added fear. Social distancing difficult in cyclone shelters. For these people, it's hard to imagine what they'll go home to once the storm passes.
It will be the poor who will be affected here. These are poor districts inhabited by poor people with thatched huts and tin roofs and asbestos roofs. And it is equally devastating. They'll lose property.
And as it crosses over to Bangladesh, more homes, more lives in its deadly path.
The BBC's Yogita Lamai with that report. And Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the fight for the National Party leadership. We're just half an hour away from the latest political poll results. We'll have reaction after 6. Calls for a special task force to deal with the economic fallout of COVID-19. Australia has one, so why don't we? And hopes of a return to play for school sport competitions within a month. How will it work? We would love your feedback on National's leadership or a 4-day working week. Do you like the sound of that? Or get in touch about school sport returning. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to head to the headlines now with Susanna.
National MPs continue to converge on Wellington, but for the most part are staying guarded ahead of tomorrow's leadership vote. The Bay of Plenty MP Todd Muller will challenge Simon Bridges' leadership in an emergency caucus meeting at midday on Friday. A new poll is due out shortly. The Director-General of Health expects to recommend a loosening of Level 2 restrictions after a 4th consecutive day of no new COVID-19 cases. Ashley Bloomfield says officials are increasingly confident there are no hidden pockets of the virus in the community. The Union for Nurses, who've been on the front line for coronavirus testing, says they've had praise heaped on them, but not the pay to match. Primary care nurses requested a 10% pay rise to put them on par with their District Health Board colleagues, but they've been offered 4.5%, spread over 2 years. A Defence Force helicopter has joined the search for 2 trampers missing in a remote part of northwest Nelson. Jessica O'Connor and Dion Reynolds, both 23 from the Tasman area, started out 12 days ago. An investigation is underway after a teenage girl was assaulted in the mid-Canterbury town of Ashburton. The police say the girl was attacked close to the Ashburton walkway near the Ashburton Dog Park on Monday afternoon. They want to hear from anyone using the path at between 1 and 4 o'clock on Monday. A review into the Civil Aviation Authority released today reveals a toxic culture of bullying and harassment. It found the complaints at the agency, including sexual harassment, were poorly handled. Main South Road in Bankside, south of Christchurch, has reopened following a 3-car crash this afternoon. 1 person was airlifted to hospital with serious injuries, while 2 others were taken by ambulance. The Education Ministry has reported relatively low school attendance following lockdown. 82% of children went to class, 1 percentage point higher than yesterday. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to the business news now with Giles Beckford. Giles, we know that these have been tough times for some media companies, and Sky TV, it's the latest one to be rattling the hat, is it?
So to speak. It's announced today that it's raising $157 million. That's to help it pay down debt, but also to fund its expansion. It gave us a snapshot of the way business had been, especially during the lockdown. Now, of course, a lot of people would have thought that Sky, it's a business that's been in change. It's had significant issues, which led to a big write-down in asset values last year. Surprisingly, it managed to hold, by and large, its core satellite service customers. And people say, well, satellite's by and large dead raw streaming. But apparently not. There are close to 500,000 households in this country still taking Sky satellite service. They're regarded as core business. The big growth for them during the lockdown was in streaming, as we would expect. They have Neon and Lightbox. They intend to put the 2 services together, but they had such an increase in subscribers. They actually had 1 million or more than 1 million people taking one or other services, streaming or satellite, during the lockdown. Now, they had a target of 1 million customers sometime in the future, so COVID-19 lockdown was good for them from that point of view. Interestingly, about this cash raise that they're doing, most of the other ones that we've seen from the big companies, the bulk of the money that's being requested has been pointed towards institutional investors, the big superannuation funds and the like, the broking firms. They pick up the lion's share. Existing customers or shareholders get a smaller slice of the action. It's the other way round for Sky TV.
The existing shareholders are being expected to pick up more than $140 million worth of the shares that are being offered. Institutional investors are only picking up around $9 to $10 million. Interesting there, the price is deeply discounted. It's 12 cents a share for the new ones being offered. The last traded price for Sky TV was 33 cents. That was yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, how many of the existing shareholders care to take up their entitlement. It is underwritten, so the shares will be bought one way or another. Sky will get its money. And it's expressing some quite adventurous plans for the future. As I say, Neon and Lightbox will be brought together. A new streaming service will be announced mid-July or thereabouts. But Sky is also looking to do broadband, so it will provide the content for a broadband supplier. In this case, the betting is that it will get into bed with Chorus, who of course have been rolling out the national network. And they've also got plans in due course for a mobile streaming service. And given their strong links with Vodafone, you'd have to say that Vodafone is probably odds-on favourite to pick up that one there. So the company still has a lot of challenges, but it looks like for the time being, at least, it's managing to face them and perhaps make some progress.
Let's stick with the media theme then. So NZ, me and Stuff. This is a rolling saga. What's the latest?
Rolling's not the word. You could take acres of print to tell this story. You remember we got the headline decision from the High Court earlier in the week saying no to NZME's bid to try and make Nine, which is the Aussie company that owns Stuff, to make them still talk to them. Basically, they wanted exclusive rights to negotiate possible purchase. The court said no. Today we got a redacted judgment from the court explaining why. Essentially, there are other potential bidders in the waters for Stuff. Nine didn't want really to have a bar of it with NZME, saying essentially that too many hassles in the way, too little time to resolve them. The government wasn't going to give them the special legislation that they wanted, so that was a big impediment. And the court's basically saying, well, look, that was done, that was history, away you go. And of course we saw NZME wave the white flag and admit defeat. We'll wait to see who emerges as the potential bidders for Stuff, what price they're willing to pay, and more importantly, what services they're willing to sustain.
And what are the numbers looking like at the end of today on the market?
Well, as we use that technical term, upsy-downsy for the market. It was upsy in the morning, and we've ended on the downsy, down 56 points for the top 50 index. That's about 0.5%. That's 10,732. On the currency market, Kiwi still some strength about it, 61.2 US cents, 93.2 Australian, and we're back above 50 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. That's Giles Beckford with our upsy-downsy business report there. Australia is outstripping us on the economic comeback from COVID-19, and we need to assemble an A-team for the economy if we don't want to get left further behind. That, according to the head of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council. Fraser Winneray says while we are tracking well on medical matters, when it comes to the wellbeing Bledisloe, Australia is doing better managing both the health and economic fallout from the pandemic. He's written to Jacinda Ardern asking her to fire up a recovery task force and reform commission, like the one Australia's set up, headed by a business leader with the same influence and access to the Prime Minister as the Director General of Health. And he says the time to do it is now.
Normally in any incident management in a company, for example, you'll have people focused on the triage of the event, of stabilising it, then the recovery, and then if it's a really significant shift, which this one is for the globe, then it's the longer term things. And that's why the Business Advisory Council is promoting the Recovery Task Force and a Reform Commission, each chaired by business people, kind of in a similar manner to what the Australian COVID Commission is, and they're looking very strong on their recovery looking forward. Now, the Australians are a wonderfully confident bunch, and it's part of their culture, and so when they see the likes of who's in the COVID Commission working almost very closely and alongside the Prime Minister's group there, that enthuses their confidence even further to make decisions, of investment or hiring or not doing the opposite of those stronger. So Australians have been known to plough their way through the recession simply because they're so confident. And I want to make sure that our economic activity, the $100 billion that's about to be spent, if that goes into some really good things because we have a strong recovery task force and reform commission.
So do you think that a commission like that should have equal access and sway with the Prime Minister as the health side of things?
That's how the Australian one has been set up, yes. So it needs to be coordinated in some ways with the health aspects, but it's not. It is very much along the lines of strong and equal access, because as we made the point on 7 April and also on the letter, the well-being is underpinned by the economy, and so it's really important that the two go hand in hand. Nailing COVID's one thing, but now it's about looking forward. What's the best team we can marshal for the recovery with the best influence on huge amount of expenditure and debt we're going to be bringing on as a country, so we don't slip behind. And if I look across the ditch at the way they've structured and assembled themselves, I'd be concerned if we don't have a really strong recovery task force bringing business and economic activity along with it, because they'll just move ahead and people will vote with their feet in the end in the long term.
So blank slate here, if you could choose, who would be on this commission?
I haven't. I'm just looking at that now, but I've got some names in mind, but I'd prefer not to share those at this point.
Come on. Would you want to be on it?
I'd like the members of the Business Advisory Council would very much like to strongly support it. Being on the commission, though, just to be clear, that's almost full time. That's what it would involve. And
so is that a no? You wouldn't want to be on it?
Well, I'd want to make sure that we're supporting those that are on it. It's a smaller group of about 6, but right now I've got a fairly challenging day job, which is pretty important for the national income as well. So I'd be on that, but I would be in there supporting them to do it. But if you really want to make this recovery task force work, you pretty much have to go in boots and all. For a period.
Okay, so do we have the talent? When you say you're looking for about 6 people, have you got a long list, or is it a struggle to make up the 6 that you'd need?
Oh no, we've absolutely got the talent in New Zealand. There's no doubt about that. We're flush with talent. It's not actually so much about that. It's about having a very significant mandate and presence to help influence decisions, as opposed to simply providing advice. But they have to be, very passionate New Zealanders who are apolitical and have great ability to bring others with them and pull them in. And that's what looking at the likes of the Australian set, they are the very prominent business people who have huge experience that can bring a lot of the economy along.
Fraser, there'll be some people out there listening going, business, pushing their way to the front of the queue, putting money and business ahead of health. What would you say to them?
The core thing is I think well-being is more than a COVID statistic, and the economy isn't just a thing that the Reserve Bank Governor talks about. Economies are jobs, it's providing for family, it's having comfortable retirements, and it's paying for new cancer drugs. And the bottom line is if the income for a government is provided by taxes on the economy, and if the economy isn't strong, then the government taxes go down, and at some point you can't keep borrowing from the bank. So that is actually how the money goes round. And so we do actually need good economic activity, good long-term investments that suit where we want to take New Zealand, and by doing so, ensure that we have plenty of tax revenue to provide the wonderful goods and services that public services that we need. So it's not actually about health versus economy. That we can go to another 160 countries around the world which are poorer than New Zealand, and we can see what weaker economies do for people's well-being.
How quickly do we need this?
I think we want to get underway extremely quickly, because Australians stood these up in late March, and we don't want to give them too much of a head start.
So you're talking days or weeks rather than months?
I think we need to be into it in a matter of weeks if we're going to do this, yeah.
And that's the chair of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, Fraser Winneray. It is about 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Defence Force helicopter has now joined the search for two trampers missing in a remote part of northwest Nelson. Jessica O'Connor and Dion Reynolds, both 23 and from the Tasman area, started out on May the 9th into the rugged wilderness of the Kahurangi National Park but haven't yet returned. They are understood to have entered the Anatori River car park, which is in a remote part of western Golden Bay. Senior Constable Dave Cogger has just told our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal the latest development in the search.
The latest big development is that we've requested the assistance of Defence Force and they're sending out an NH90 to assist in the search.
And that'll be tomorrow?
No, it's here now.
Can work through the night?
That'll be working during daylight and at night using infrared and light sourcing technology to capture any fire, any heat, cell phones, headlamps or anything like that.
Now you're working in the Richmond base via satellite communication, is that right?
That's right. We've been very lucky that Fire Emergency New Zealand have put their command vehicle over there and that's enabled us to link straight in to the Richmond Emergency Centre. We've also had a very generous farmer that has allowed us to use his broadband connection and we've put a repeater station up there to enable us to talk to the teams in the field.
So that's at the Anatori car park?
That is correct, or past the car park on a private land.
Is there any comment on the fact that these two went hiking in a level 3 lockdown?
To be fair, that's something we're not really concentrating on. Our focus is bringing back Jess and Dion.
And there is hope from the police's point of view that they could still be okay?
From all our area background and next of kin, family, friends and employment inquiries, no one has ever raised any doubt about Jess's competencies in the outdoors. With good skills, good preparation, good gear, and with the amount of food that they took in with them, or that's alleged to be taken in with them, their survivability is high.
Do the police have a better idea than what the public know about what their intentions were?
That's a critical question. Tracy, we've got no idea at all what their intentions are, and despite our large media canvas, having a lot of police staff working in Golden Bay and the police communication system with lines open, we still don't have any concrete intentions of where they were going and when they were due out.
Dave Cogger says every effort is being made to find the pair and the police are offering support to their families. A Dunedin family wants answers after a 23-year-old man tried to take his own life just 10 hours after being discharged from a psychiatric hospital during lockdown. The man's mother says she was offered no support when her son was released into her care during lockdown, and she fears he could try to harm himself again when he's released into her care again tomorrow. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
He couldn't make eye contact, he couldn't speak. They diagnosed him that he was in psychosis and they discharged him when he was psychotic to his family who couldn't possibly care for him. Like, he never should have been released. He was psychotically ill. You know, he needed to be with professionals, he needed to be medicated, he needed to be taken care of, he needed to be kept safe. That's the bottom line, and they failed to keep him safe.
That's Maria speaking about her nephew. The 23-year-old Dunedin man attempted to take his own life just 10 hours after his release from the acute psychiatric ward of Wakari Hospital in the early hours of May the 12th, whilst the country was still at alert level 3. The man, who Checkpoint agreed not to name, was admitted to the hospital just 3 days earlier on May the 9th. On the day he was discharged, the man was administered a slow-release antipsychotic drug before being released into his mother's care. His mother, Vicky, says she trusted the doctors to make the best decisions for her son and feels let down.
That's why we put him in there. We said he needs help and he said he's fine. He will just tell everybody he's fine.
Just 10 hours after arriving home, and whilst Vicky was asleep, her son attempted to take his own life. It was only the thud as he collapsed to the floor that woke her and gave him the time needed for an ambulance to arrive and rush him to Dunedin Hospital's emergency department. Maria says the whole family feels let down by the Southern DHB.
I'm sure they're really sorry that they released him, but we could have gone to a funeral on Friday and we'd have lost that boy. And we're really concerned as a family about other families that are going through the same thing, that trust their family member into the care of the DHB to be let down. It's just wrong.
The man is now back in Wakati Hospital's care, but he is due to be released back into his mother's care tomorrow. Whilst the family has received a personal tearful apology from the man's doctor, Maria says it doesn't go far enough, and the man should never have been discharged from hospital in the first place. The family fears the man may try to harm himself again without an adequate support network around him.
I don't think he's well enough to come out on Friday. He really wants to get out, but people always want to get out of hospital. I don't think he should be released, particularly on a Friday, because it runs into the weekend, and he wouldn't have any care until Monday. Yeah. The only care he'd have is EPS, which would traumatise the family once again.
The Southern DHB declined our request for an interview, but in a written statement, Mental Health Medical Director Dr Evan Mason says the circumstances outlined are very distressing, and he can assure us Southern DHB's teams are focused on working with the young man and his family. In response to questions about offering the family a formal written apology, Dr Mason says he and the other staff involved are sorry whenever anyone feels driven to harm themselves and has to return to hospital. He says their aim is every patient in the service will have a transition plan that outlines for them and their carers how to cope with the symptoms they've been experiencing and where to get help. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
With schools back, ANSI students are wondering when they can pull on their boots and get back on the sports field. Schools and amateur sports bodies are hopeful competitions can return in about a month. But right now, mass gatherings, as sport are limited to 10 people. Winter sports seasons aren't lost, but will look a little different to before COVID-19. Jordan Bond reports.
With strange new behaviours of distancing and bubbles, the thought of being allowed to smash into each other for fun felt a long way off. But with recent COVID cases minimal and no community transmission for 6 weeks, there's some hope a restart for school and club sport is only a month away. Gordon Noble Campbell from the Amateur Sport Association says that'll be a huge relief to many around the country.
Everybody that I've spoken to who's involved in sport around New Zealand, it talks about the huge pent-up demand to be able to get out and really enjoy whatever game it might be that is their passion.
Mr Noble Campbell says a lot of competitions are aiming towards a mid to late June start date, but there are still some hurdles. Most team sports can't be played with fewer than 10 people, limited by mass gathering restrictions. So sports bodies will be keenly watching a government review of those rules this coming Monday. The head of School Sport New Zealand, Gary Carnahan, says schools are exempt from those gathering limits, so some teams are already training.
Some are and some aren't. Principals are doing what principals do really well and put their own lens over whether it's safe or not and what their appetite is for that, within the guidelines of hygiene and sanitisation and contact tracing and all of those physical distancing things that schools apply.
But that's within one school. Teams from different schools can't yet mix for games. About 3/4 of the boys at Wellington's St Pat's College play sport. The school's sport director, Jonathan Milmo, says they've held off on trainings this first week back to let students ease in. He says they've got hygiene plans in place for training, all hands washed, all personal gear kept that way, and all shared equipment such as balls cleaned after every training. He says they'll likely start practices next week, and fingers crossed, inter-school competitions can start in a month's time.
Mid-June or maybe June 20, we start competition across all the codes, and we get about a 10 to 12 week season for our teams, which is shorter than normal, but I still think it's, that people accept we're in different times, and I think 10 to 12 weeks is still enough to have it's still a worthwhile season.
With professional sport being treated separately, there'll be a televised fix for some soon, but at the moment it'll be strictly vicarious. Mr Noble Campbell says nothing can replace amateur sport, and its return will be welcomed, when safe, with open arms.
Sport and sporting clubs are really the lifeblood and the heartbeat of all New Zealand communities. And not being able to get together and enjoy the game in an environment where social distancing and isolation has prevented from people doing so means that now we're in the situation where everyone can't wait to get back on the field.
For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
There are now at least 5 million confirmed cases of the coronavirus around the world. The World Health Organization has also reported the biggest rise in COVID-19 infections in a single day, 106,000. More than two-thirds are in just 4 countries, the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Brazil. The number of cases officially reported in Brazil alone is more than 270,000, but it's expected there are probably many more. Brazil's health ministry has approved the use of 2 anti-malarial drugs to fight COVID-19, even though there's no conclusive evidence that they work. President Jair Bolsonaro has been promoting their use after Donald Trump said he was taking one, hydroxychloroquine, as a preventative measure. The WHO says Latin America is the centre of the pandemic. The BBC's Rich Preston has the latest from the continent.
Lockdowns remain in place across much of Latin America as it tackles the spread of coronavirus. In Colombia, which has around 17,000 cases and over 600 deaths, police use drones to look for those breaking quarantine rules in the capital, Bogotá. But they're a little more sophisticated than that. The drones are also looking for people with a fever. And if it spots someone with a high temperature, it sends the location to a control room so a medical team can be dispatched to find the person and test them for the virus.
It gives us an approximate body temperature and directs the case to a national system so it can be attended to.
Colombia's neighbour to the south, Peru, has the second highest death toll from COVID-19 in Latin America. In the capital, Lima, a protest by these hospital workers demanding more protective equipment, saying they haven't been given the tools they need to do their jobs safely.
There are already many infected workers, many dead. We don't have the security to survive this pandemic here whilst working with COVID-19 patients.
Meanwhile, in neighbouring Bolivia, the country's health minister has been detained on suspicion of corruption over the alleged purchase of 170 ventilators bought to treat COVID-19 patients at a cost of $27,000 each, when the real price should have been less than half that. The Spanish firm which makes the machines says they were sold via a third party. In Chile, which has reported more than 500 coronavirus deaths, there's concern about the environmental impact of the pandemic. It's one of Latin America's biggest producers of rubbish, yet very little is recycled. What is, usually, has to be taken to central drop-off points, but with a population under lockdown, few people are doing that.
The drop in recycling has been shocking, and you can see it here in particular. At this collection centre, the quantity of material was impressive every time we came here. Now it's dropped severely.
It's caused a drop in work for some recycling staff and has pushed them to go directly to people's houses.
The clean points are closed, so there's demand for people to come and pick up at individual homes.
As countries across Latin America continue to tackle the spread of coronavirus, the long-term impact remains unclear. With hospitals badly affected, food shortages reported in some areas, and income from tourism all but wiped out, there are fears the virus will leave its mark on the continent long after it has been beaten.
And that is the BBC's Rich Preston with that report. Just an update on a story from a little earlier in the program that is about the 2 trampers who are missing, believed to be in the Kahurangi National Park. They're both 23 years old, Jessica O'Connor and Dion Reynolds. They're from the Tasman area and started out on a tramp on May the 9th. The police have just updated information from their search today. They say the search continued with the support of a drone and infrared capabilities. And they have located some footprints and an historic campsite near the Webb River. However, the police say they have not yet been able to confirm if either the footprints or the campsite belonged to the pair. There is, as you may have heard in Tracy Neal's interview with the police, an Air Force, New Zealand Air Force NH-90 helicopter and crew have arrived in the area, and they will continue the search for the pair. There's a crew of 4 on board and a medic, and they will search inland from the Anatori River mouth and along the riverbed, and will be using night vision goggles this evening, looking for light sources such as fires or torches, which may be being used by the trampers. And as the police earlier said, these two are well prepared and have experience, so hopefully they will be found. In terms of feedback around level 2 and the prospect that there might be an adjustment to the rules around level 2, obviously that's being looked at every fortnight. This person says, irrespective of what level we go to and restrictions, I have no desire to attend funerals, weddings, restaurants, cafes, concerts, etc. They are not risks I'm prepared to take, not a result of policy, they say. And on the 4-day working week, whoa, this has enthused a few of you. 4 working days, ! Yes, please. Dream come true. And John says, yep, I'm a fan of a 4-day week, but remember to be fair to all of us peasant workers. All retail and other services will be shut for 3 days. I'm old and remember New Zealand shutting down for the weekend. Glorious. You just have to plan for your needs for the next 3 days. Well, maybe they could stagger us on the 4-day weeks, John, so that people can still keep their businesses open, just different people working at different times. And this one says, how about the old idea of 9-day fortnights with 9-hour days and 8 hours on the 9th day?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. National MP Nikki Kay is tight-lipped ahead of tomorrow's urgent caucus meeting to decide on the party's future leadership. It's understood that Ms Kay will run as Todd Muller's deputy if he is voted as National's new leader. The challenge to Simon Bridges' leadership came after a poll earlier this week showed support for National slumping. Ms Kay flew into the capital today ahead of tomorrow's vote at Parliament. But at Wellington Airport, Ms Kay would not publicly confirm she is seeking the deputy position.
Oh, look, I think these issues are matters for the caucus.
Do you think that it's time for a change in leadership?
Look, I think it's really important in terms of the respect of my caucus colleagues that we let these issues happen in the caucus room.
Auckland Central MP Nikki Kay. Both sides have told RNZ they're confident of a win. Nurses who've been at the front line of COVID-19 testing say they're incredibly disappointed they're not getting the pay rise they deserve. Primary care nurses want a 10% rise to match the salary of their District Health Board colleagues, but are being offered less than half of that. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
Primary care nurses staff GP clinics and make up a large number of those swabbing for the coronavirus at testing centres. Their union, the nurses' organisation, says they've had praise heaped on them for their efforts, but not the pay to match. It says the nurses have been putting themselves on the line, working long, stressful days. The Health Minister, David Clark, says it's a matter for the nurses and their employers, but the nurses say he has the power to offer targeted funding. Ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
A Defence Force helicopter has joined the search for 2 trampers missing in a remote part of northwest Nelson. Jessica O'Connor and Dion Reynolds, both 23 and from the Tasman area, started out on May the 9th but haven't yet returned. They're understood to have entered the Anatori River car park, which is in a remote part of western Golden Bay. Senior Constable Dave Cogger says the Defence Force NH-90 helicopter is now assisting the search.
That'll be working during daylight and at night using infrared and also light sourcing technology to capture any fire, any heat, cell phones, headlamps or anything like that.
Dave Cogger says the pair are well equipped and have a good chance of still being alive. Many bars and nightclubs may remain shut despite the rules allowing them to open from today. Numbers are restricted to 100 and they have to ensure customers are served, separated and seated. The Chief Executive of Hospitality New Zealand, Julie White, says the ban on dancing means many late-night venues will remain closed for now. She's encouraging everybody to go out and show their support for their favourite bar and help to ensure they survive. A Dunedin family wants answers and assurances after a 23-year-old man tried to take his own life during lockdown, just 10 hours after being discharged from a psychiatric hospital. The man's mother, Vicky, told Checkpoint she was offered no support when her son was released into her care earlier this month, only 2 days after being admitted to an acute psychiatric ward of Wakari Hospital. His aunt, Maria, says the Southern DHB owes the family a formal apology.
He couldn't make eye contact, he couldn't speak. They diagnosed him that he was in psychosis, and they discharged him when he was psychotic to his family, who couldn't possibly care for him. He never should have been released.
The family fears he may try to harm himself again when he is due to be released tomorrow. The Southern DHB says it's focused on working with the young man and his family. In news just to hand, National's polling results have sunk even further. The One News Colmar Brunton poll has put National at only 29%, the lowest since 2003. Meanwhile, the Labour Party has seen a surge in support and is sitting at 59%. Australia's media watchdog has found Talkback host Alan Jones breached multiple media rules in his comments about Jacinda Ardern last year. Annabelle Reid reports.
On his radio show, Mr Jones said the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison should, quote, shove a sock down the throat of his New Zealand counterpart. He was angered by Ms Ardern's warning at the Pacific Islands Forum that Australia would need to answer to the Pacific on climate change. The Australian Media Communications Authority says he breached broadcasting codes for decency with his use of violent metaphors. Mr Jones later apologised to the Prime Minister, and last week the 79-year-old announced his retirement from radio. Call Annabelle Reid, TNA.
It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Concern is growing over when challengers can arrive in New Zealand to begin preparing for the America's Cup. 8 months out from the Challenger Series in Auckland, 2 syndicates have expressed frustration that their base building staff and sailing teams are in the dark over receiving work visas, a concern that could place the regatta's schedule in jeopardy. British Challengers Team UK and the New York-based American Magic Syndicate are pressuring the New Zealand government to declare when foreign nationals will be allowed entry. The Warriors have completed a rushed signing of young Canberra forward Jack Murchie to ease their injury crisis ahead of the National Rugby League's resumption next week. Former junior Kangaroo Murchie has joined the club at their Gosford base, having been granted an early release on the final year of his Raiders contract. The 22-year-old completed his first training run with his new teammates today and looks a strong chance to be in the Warriors team to play St George Illawarra next week. His signing follows the NRL's refusal to grant the Warriors approval for a loan player following a spate of forward injuries. That's the news.
Tomorrow on 9 to noon, the government is urged to get on and use new immigration powers to benefit thousands of migrant workers. The dangers of fraud becoming more attractive to struggling organisations. Why it's time to be extra vigilant. Why Dunedinites have been seeing red on the beaches with a squat lobster specialist. The Luminaries TV series production designer talks about recreating colonial Aotearoa and music from our early rave scene. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the whole of the North Island, generally fine weather. The odd shower about eastern Northland and Coromandel and northern Gisborne. Cloudy periods about Kapiti and Wellington with patchy drizzle early tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather with variable high cloud. Bulla and Westland, often cloudy with a few showers. Otago and Southland, rain. For Southland, Clutha and the Southern Lakes this evening, then spreading north tomorrow, but only the odd shower will reach Dunedin and North Otago. Fiordland, rain with heavy falls easing tomorrow night. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and you're with Checkpoint. High noon tomorrow is when National Party leader Simon Bridges' fate will be decided after he forced the hand of potential challengers, calling all his MPs back to Wellington to decide the issue. Bay of Plenty MP Todd Muller wants the job and was in the capital today making his case to colleagues. Things came to a head after a News Hub Reid research poll that was disastrous for National. RNZ understands the leadership vote will be tight. And speaking of numbers, the One News Colmar Brunton poll is just out, and joining us with the details is Joe Moyer. How do these numbers stack up, Joe?
Yeah, no, they're really not good, Lisa. They are worse than that poll that we saw on Monday night with the News Hub Reid research. So what we've got is National is down to 29, Labour is up to 59. Now, in terms of those numbers moving, National's down 17 points to 29 and Labour is up 18. Just a quick run of the minor parties. The Greens fell to 4.7, which would put them under that 5% threshold to come back to Parliament, and New Zealand First on 3. In terms of those preferred Prime Minister numbers, Simon Bridges is on 5 and Jacinda Ardern is on 63. If you look at that from a House perspective in terms of seats, that would give Labour 79 seats in Parliament, which would obviously clearly allow them to govern alone.
And National on those numbers is down to 38 seats. How does that compare overall, that Colmar Brunton result, compared to the News Hub Reid research poll, which was out on Monday?
Yeah, so on Monday night we saw National drop down to 30.6, which was pretty bad news and obviously instigated a lot of this leadership pressure on Simon Bridges. So we've seen it drop into the 20s, which really just makes things even worse. Just running over those numbers from Monday night, 30.6% for National, which was down 12.7 on the last poll for them. And on that number, at least 16 National MPs wouldn't make it back into Parliament. Labour was on 56.5 percentage points in that poll on Monday night, which was up 14 for them. That poll would have given Labour 72 seats in Parliament. Obviously would have been able to govern alone on that number as well. But yes, this poll tonight is worse again.
So Joe, in terms of the practicalities, how will things play out tomorrow?
So that poll on Monday night really got things going in terms of the chatter amongst National Party MPs 4 months out from an election, thinking, what are they going to do? Have they got time to do something different? Now, what we saw was Simon Bridges actually come out in his media rounds yesterday morning and basically call the bluff of Todd Muller and Nikki Kay, who we understand are running on a ticket in terms of challenging that leadership. So he went out to media and said that he didn't name them, but he said that there was a challenge against them, and basically within 12 hours yesterday a lot happened. We saw Todd Muller confirmed that he was challenging Simon Bridges' leadership. He sent an email out to the entire caucus, which of course leaked to media, saying that he didn't think Simon Bridges was up to the job. That also led to Simon Bridges deciding to call an emergency caucus meeting rather than waiting for that normal caucus meeting that would happen on Tuesday next week. So we've now got this emergency meeting happening tomorrow here at Parliament at midday. So we've had MPs flying in from all across the country today, and will continue tomorrow morning to come in as well. We'll see Todd Muller and Simon Bridges go head to head for that vote. It's very unlikely at this point that anyone else will be challenging, because we just simply haven't heard of anyone else trying to stack up those numbers. And then in terms of that actual result tomorrow, we expect sometime tomorrow afternoon a press conference in the Legislative Chamber here in Parliament, and what will happen there is that the deputy and the leader, the victorious ones, whoever they are, will come to that press conference at Parliament at some point tomorrow afternoon, and all will be revealed.
Thanks, Joe. That is Joe Moyer joining us from Parliament. Let's go now to Dave Cormack, political commentator, PR specialist and former Communications and Policy Director for the Green Party. Also on the line we have Tau Henare, former National Party MP. If I can start with you first, Dave. National might have been thinking it couldn't get much worse, and then it just did, didn't it?
Yeah, that poll is a big oof for the National Party. Talking to some people today, they thought that the News Hub poll would be about their flaw, but I think what this shows is that there actually really isn't a flaw for either party, and that this is as bad as it's been since 2003, I think, so coming up near 20 years.
Do you think that this makes Simon Bridges' fate any clearer, having two polls that basically mirror each other?
Yeah, so there were a few MPs who said they were kind of waiting around to see if this poll would mirror the News Hub poll, and I think they were hoping that it would be really clear-cut. If it had been a 34 or a 35, I think that just would have made it even more confusing for them. But I think getting that 2 in front of the number has probably solidified it for Todd. I'm pretty sure that Judith, who's remained out of it sensibly to date, will probably swing in behind Todd on those numbers, and I know that she'll bring a few votes with her.
If I can bring you into the conversation, Tau, do you think that Simon Bridges can survive this?
At in terms of the leadership vote, no. And in terms of even his political career, he is gone either on the 20th of September or before. I think it's a shock. But I gotta say, Jacinda has played her hand like the best card player I've ever seen, and she's been given a few good little bits and pieces, and namely the COVID. She's been in the spotlight every day for the last 8 or 9 weeks. But this poll hasn't only been about that. It's been about Simon and the way he's handled it since he became leader, and it's been going down every time. And so he's toast. He's gone burger.
So you think if he loses the leadership tomorrow, it is a question of whether he walks away then or he tries for an electorate seat? Or do you think he'll walk away at the election?
If I was him, I'd walk away now. I mean, what's the point when nobody wants you? Look, the thing is that this poll, not only is it bad for Simon, but it's bad for the party. And what's worse for the party is that a couple of months out from an election, they're having a leadership debate, a leadership challenge, which we all thought only happened in Labour.
Dave,
and I kid you not, this will devastate National like most of them haven't seen before. You know, we all came in on the back of John Key, on his popularity. And mate, a lot of them are going to go out on the back of how poorly Simon has done over the last couple of years.
Dave, if Simon Bridges is ousted tomorrow, can he just go to the back room and hang in there, do you think? That's what Andrew Little did on 24%, not huge differences between the numbers we're seeing here.
No, because I think Andrew was a man of dignity, and Simon hasn't really shown that over the last couple of years as leader, that he is that guy. The more New Zealand got to know him, the less they liked him. And so I think he's probably more inclined to take a burn-it-all-down approach. And, you know, he already threatened the caucus earlier that if they rolled him, he'd trigger a by-election. But I think he wildly overestimated his importance to Tauranga. I think National could run the donkey in that electorate and still probably win it. Though when they're down at 29%, they're going to start losing a few electorates too. And so there's going to be a few MPs that are in tight electorates that are going to start worrying about their jobs now too.
Nothing like unemployment to focus the mind, you're saying?
Very much so. And like many other people in New Zealand who are probably staring down the same terror, at least these MPs will get a taste of the real world.
So in February, I looked back at polls in February. Well, they basically had National and Labour neck and neck, and actually National a point and a half ahead. How could the party have lost so much support so quickly?
Well, it's part of what Toe was saying.
Oh, sorry, you go, Dave.
Sorry, it was part of what Toe was saying, in that we've had a lot of exposure to the PM, and we've also had a lot of exposure to Simon, right? Like, so a lot of people have been paying attention to politics, probably more so than in a long time, because we've all been sitting around in our houses with nothing else to do for the last 7 weeks. And so the more they see of this guy, the less that they were inclined to vote for him to be their Prime Minister.
Here's a question that a lot of those people would have asked themselves when it broke during the COVID lockdown. How is it that he can drive 1,000 Ks to Parliament just for a select committee, which most of us, in fact all of us, had to do via Zoom or Skype? And that was one of the questions. And Dave is absolutely right. We had nothing to do other than watch the goggle box or listen to the wireless. And what was on the wireless and what was on the goggle box? Politics.
Hey, Toe, you were there for the Jenny Shipley, Jim Bolger spill. How nasty can these things get?
Oh, no, it'll be nasty, all right. And it's a sort of, I hate to say it, but I quite like that sort of carry on. I don't know whether it makes me a meanie or what, but the fact of the matter is that National are not going to win this election. They just aren't. And you'd have to be a real betting person to put even $10 on them getting 40%. I actually thought they'd come home with 42, 43, and it'll be a good contest. But these last two polls have destroyed any of that, and it doesn't matter how many phone calls they make tonight and between now and the election. I still think they're going to get a hiding from this, I tell you.
So last word to you, Dave, before we go. What if Todd Muller and Nikki Kaye don't get over the line? What happens to them?
Well, they'll get, you mean in the leadership vote?
Yeah, if they don't make it, if Simon Bridges is still the leader, what do they get? Sent right to the back of the room?
Yeah, well, they'll get dispatched down to the back, and all the other Liberal side of the party will as well. I mean, Todd's not an exciting guy. I don't think he's going to inspire Mullermania the way we saw Jacinda Mania. So, it's still a chance, but I'd say that at this stage, Simon's, he's buggered.
Thanks for that. That is Dave Cormack, political commentator and PR specialist, along with Tau Henare, former National Party MP there, just discussing the fact that the Colmar-Brunton poll is out and it is worse for National than the News Hub Reid Research poll. It is almost 20 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Please buy a beer. That's the plea from bar owners in Wellington as they reopen their doors today for the first time in almost 2 months. Lockdown has taken a serious toll on the finances of many establishments, and with strict distancing rules and a 100-person cap on the number of people allowed inside, some still have an uncertain future. Our reporter Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas filed this report.
For the first time in weeks, bars throughout Wellington are getting ready to reopen their doors. Panhead on Torres Street is one of them. Its owner and local Hospitality New Zealand rep, Matt McLaughlin, has been hard at work making sure tables are properly spaced out and contact tracing systems are in place. But he expects business to be tough.
We're going into a market that's the big unknown, but what we do know is that there's no tourists. We know that only 50% of the workforce in Wellington City are coming back to work at the moment from their offices, and we know that some of those people are reluctant to come into an on-premise environment. We're going into a cold winter with no events on, so our market that is usually at 100%, I would say at best is probably going to sit at about 50%, and when your margins are between 5 and 10%, running at 50% is near impossible.
Down the road at Ivy Bar, owner Stephen Marwini is getting ready for their reopening. They are hosting a drag show on Friday. Being underground and usually not having many tables has proven challenging.
Well, the new restrictions are basically a complete opposite of what we are and what we do. We used to only have about 6 tables in a little lounge stage area, and the rest of it was standing, people standing, drinking, dancing. So we've now managed to rearrange our format and have got, I think, 16 tables. We've got tables on the dance floor and tables on the stage. And we've had to train our staff who are normally just used to working behind the bar how to do table service, which none of us have ever done.
Pre-COVID, Ivy could accommodate about 100 people. That's now been cut in half. Stephen says some tough decisions lie ahead.
So I've got 4 main bar staff, myself, and an events manager. We're going to be having to probably look at letting one of those roles go in the future. But at the moment, whilst we've got the wage subsidy, we can support everybody. But once that goes, it's going to be a bit tougher. We're opening. It's going to be rubbish, but it's still better than nothing.
To help get as many people as possibly out safely, Matt McLaughlin says the council has agreed to shut Courtney Place to street traffic over the coming nights to ensure there is enough space available.
The hospitality operators and the police went to the council and said that we thought it would be a really good idea for safety measures for the street to be closed off, and the council agreed, which was really, really good. The Courtney Place is going to be closed off, so we're going to have people going to be able to social distance. We hope that it's not going to turn into a street party, because that's not what it's all about. But people will be able to be safe, which I think is what we're after.
What's not known today is how many of these establishments will stay standing after the winter, and how many will become another COVID casualty. So tonight, Matt McLaughlin's message is simple.
Come out and support your local operators. You know, as Dr. Bloomfield said, it's safe to do so now. People are back at school, our businesses are back open, they're back open safely. We just hope that you come on and have a few beers and have something to eat.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Let's return now to that One News Colmar Brunton poll released tonight. Whilst it was all bad for National, it's a different story for ACT. The leader of ACT, David Seymour, is on the line now. David, you must be pretty rapt with that.
Oh, good evening, Lisa. Look, it's nice. It's been a long, hard slog with ACT just getting off the floor of sort of sub 1%, and now you're seeing a proposition of multiple ACT MPs returning to Parliament. It's a very long way to go. But yeah, we're a little bit pleased with it.
So 2% in the Colmar Brunton, and I think it was 1.8% in the Reid Research, which would get you one other friend in the Reid Research and 2 with the Colmar Brunton. Are you benefiting from some of the fallout from National?
Look, I think National is clearly losing vote in all directions, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of that had come to us. But there'll also be people who voted for New Zealand First last time, thinking that Winston would back them up and, keep the buggers honest, as Winston likes to say. And he really hasn't done that. So I suspect we're draining a bit of support away from New Zealand First. And there's even people, former Green voters, say that because we stood up for civil liberties and freedom of speech, they suddenly find ACT attractive, to the surprise of me and them. But there you go.
Who would you be bringing in with you on these numbers?
Well, the party's still got to decide its list, but we've had a pretty good deputy leader who's stuck it out through some tough times, and Beth Holbrook, she's an award-winning businesswoman, a former farmer, mother of 2, and a successful politician at the local level up there in Rodney. So, look, she'd be a good example of someone who I think would make a good MP on her first day. And I think there'll be a bit of competition in the party as people see the opportunity to go and represent ACT values. There may be a few more lining up.
What if there's not an accommodation or an arrangement or in Epsom?
Well, that's an interesting question, and we've taken some time to really poll in detail how Epsom people think. And so, first of all, the last time we polled, they said David Seymour's ahead. The second thing they said is the reason why that is that we think he's a good local MP, and or regardless of what anyone else says, we get it. As Epsom voters, we have in the past chosen the government by voting strategically, and so long as we think David Seymour is a decent local MP, and even my opponents tend to concede that, then we're going to take advantage of the strategy again.
Would it help you if there was a different leader in the National Party?
Look, I don't often agree with Jacinda Ardern, but I think she's got at least one thing right, and that is it doesn't help for one party leader to comment on other parties' internal issues. The Nats have clearly got a little bit of ruction that they need to digest over the next 24 hours or so, and ultimately ACT and National need each other if they wish to govern and advance their ideas for New Zealanders. So I just wish them the best and hope that they can get through and start messaging to New Zealand, because together our two parties need to give an alternative to what we have right now.
Thanks for joining us. That is the ACT leader, David Seymour. There are growing fears for the health and well-being of thousands of crew trapped on cruise ships around the world since the pandemic brought the industry to a halt. Much has been reported about the thousands of passengers who've fallen ill or died from the coronavirus, but at least 5 Indonesian crew have died from COVID-19, and thousands of crew have been stranded at sea with no idea when they can go home. The ABC's Anne Barker filed this report.
Ibu Sukani sobs as she strokes a photo of her son Pujioko, smiling with crewmates on the cruise ship Symphony of the Seas. It's 5 years since he left home in Java to work for Royal Caribbean. His plan was to work so he could make us happy, his mother says. It was a job he loved, his father says, that took him around the world. But in his last days on board, Pujioko fell ill with coronavirus. For almost a week, he went to the ship's clinic with worsening symptoms. His parents say it took 6 days before he was tested for COVID-19 and finally taken ashore. If the company took him to hospital sooner, he could have survived, says his father, Isanto. Pujioko died in a Miami hospital 2 weeks later. His parents are now suing Royal Caribbean, alleging it not only failed their son, but did nothing to protect crew members from the virus after passengers had disembarked. Their lawyer is Michael Winkleman.
Well, they shut down all cruising on March 13th, and yet even after that, it was as though there was nothing going on for the crew members, nothing being done to protect them. No social distancing, no quarantines, no masks, and in fact, they even had a party on St. Patrick's Day.
Royal Caribbean refused to discuss the case with the ABC, saying it wouldn't comment on pending litigation. Pujioko was one of 2 Indonesian crew to die from COVID-19 on Royal Caribbean ships. Around the world, hundreds more crew have caught COVID-19 or died from the virus on other ships, and tens of thousands of international crew are still stranded at sea.
You have crew members now that going on plus 2 months, they've been trapped on these ships away from their families, the vast majority of them not being paid. So I think mental health is a huge issue on those ships.
Several other crew have died in apparent suicides, including one crew member who jumped from the deck of the Regal Princess in Europe. In recent days, crew on a separate Royal Caribbean ship staged a hunger strike, desperate to be allowed to go home. Shipping companies argue that flight bans and lockdowns have made it impossible to repatriate all their crew. Royal Caribbean says it's now working with authorities around the world to get crew home. Though it's no consolation for Pujioko's parents, their son will never come home again.
Just time for a little bit of your feedback before you go. This person says on the National Party leadership, I hope that the party picks the challengers who take the party into the 21st century with fresh ideas and policies which are positive and constructive. The whole point of an effective opposition. Opting for the status quo, Jeremy says, will doom the party to irrelevance. Another person says Luxon will win botany and the next day will be made leader. Thanks for joining us this evening. That is all we've got time for. The news team will keep you up to date overnight. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The latest poll suggests a huge slump in support for National, putting the party at just 29%, the lowest since 2003. The chair of the Civil Aviation Authority has personally apologised to staff for the organisation's failure to stamp out bullying and harassment. Nurses who have been on the front line of COVID-19 testing say they're disappointed to not receive the pay rise they deserve. And bars and nightclubs can open back up from today, but some will remain shut due to further coronavirus restrictions. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
Tonight on Nights, Fergus Barrowman's got some smooth jazz releases to help you through some of those COVID moments. Alison Balance is looking for microbes halfway up Mount Erebus. And our toxicologist Leo Shep's been checking out the health risks involved in injecting hypochlorite.